I appreciate particularly your mentioning the prisons. And I feel strongly that a very important piece here is making sure that education is offered in the prisons. There's hardly anything going on there. I tutored a young African-American boy who's now in prison, in federal prison. There's very little that's available for these young men. And I think that's as critical as anything else. It's taking a holistic approach. The other thing I just want to mention, because I also feel strongly about it, is that the educational system needs a basic overhaul. One of the things that I've learned, just a quick story, one 15-year-old teenager, tough, furious, couldn't wait to be 16 to drop out of school because he knew he was dumb. Senator Fulbright's former wife started a whole program in Washington, D.C. at Anacostia. That little boy, working in the artistic process, having tangible examples to work with rather than abstractions, turned out to be a mathematical genius and got a full scholarship to MIT. Now, how many of the African-American children are being taught in schools that only know how to teach in this context of abstractions? That's a fundamental principle that needs to be corrected.
Brilliant comment. Adequate means meets the needs of the child. If you're going to meet the needs of a child in a wheelchair, you don't create 2 stories of steps to get into the school building. If you're going to meet the need of a child, you need to go where that child has an understanding. So if we go in with our white view of education and we use the word museum in Mullins, South Carolina, or Raines, the kids don't know what a museum is. But they do know what an elderberry bush is. So you got to meet them where they are. There's a brilliant lady who testified for us from Stanford, and I'll mess up her name, but she talks about culturally relevant education, finding the hook to hang it on. And one of the things she talks about, if you read Isabel's great book, there's a whole food is all through it. I mean, you just can't stand. I mean, look at me. I'm hungry just reading a chapter of her book. And, but here's the thing: if your grandmother can make a sweet potato pie, she understands chemistry and thermodynamics. And that's where the hook is to teach those subjects to the kids as opposed to the conceptual comment that you made. The other thing is, did you hear Isabel's last comments about jail? They will get out, she said. It's all about education in jail.
I'd like to add to that by saying that that's such a great example that marries or bridges both the present and the future with the past. Because one of the great lessons of this great migration, meaning the fact that people felt that they had no option but to leave, was that many of the people who were working these fields in cotton or tobacco fields, whatever it might have been, were actually in their hearts opera singers, chemists, physicians, lawyers, physicists. All of these people have been held back for centuries. Who knows where we would be as a country had these people been able to be their truer, fuller selves all of these centuries ago. To this day, African Americans in this country have been enslaved for longer than they have been free. That was a number that was astounding to me. That's astounding. It began in 1619 and did not end until the 1860s. And you could say that it went on beyond that because of Jim Crow, segregation. And so every African American that you meet comes from a line of people who had been enslaved for longer than they have been free. And that means that we have generations upon generations, centuries upon centuries of people who could have been so much more, but were held back from being that. When these people left, and ultimately it was their children who benefited more than they did, many of them, you have people like Toni Morrison, who became a Nobel laureate. She would never have been able to become that. Her parents stayed in Alabama, where they were from. But she had a chance to get access to books, which had not been available. She couldn't go into a library as a child, had she been raised in Alabama. And you kind of, if you're going to become a Nobel laureate, you kind of need a book.
You kind of need to read. Hey, let me catch a spark off that word held back. In the trial, we drove from a little Ramada Inn on I-95 where we stayed for all these nights away from home. And every day I would drive by a little cinder block church. I mean, you've seen 1,000 of them out in rural South Carolina. And one morning I'm driving by, and the sermon title captured the state of South Carolina as we were articulating it to the judge in a one phrase. This is the phrase: to hold a man down, you have to stay with him. And South Carolina's been holding people down, and we're staying with them as a state by holding them down. We've got to lift people up and lift ourselves up as a state.
You have a question?